This week's video is a little bit different compared to my usual kind. It's all about how I pack my pots to be shipped. For those of you who don't know, generally speaking I sell my work online through my own website, which means that I do all the packaging and all the shipping myself. All the boxes you see here, which total about 388 pots, in 266 separate orders, and they're going all over the world, from Japan to New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the US, South Africa, France, Germany, Switzerland, and lots in the UK. In total, over the last 6 or so years, I've sent over 1,500 separate parcels, and only 2 of those have ever arrived broken, which I think, no matter how well you pack, eventually something will break. Anyhow, what I'd like to do in this video is just go over the general process, from preparing all my packaging materials to wrapping the pots up and how I pack them into the boxes. And while this all might seem very obvious, you'd be surprised to know just how many people package things inappropriately for the journeys they're going to make. And while this video won't show you the perfect method or the best method, it'll show you how I do it. As similar to how making pottery is such a versatile process, it seems that every single potter or craftsperson has different ways of packaging and shipping their work. So, let's begin. The first thing I do prior to a big shop update is I spend a couple of days preparing all of my boxes and wrapping materials. This way, when it comes to packaging the pots up, I'm not wasting time with every order making the box before I have to put the pot inside it. And after doing so many shops now, I know approximately how many of each size of box I need, and these 23 by 16 by 16 centimeter boxes always seem to be the ones I need to make the most of. Generally, I get more individual orders as opposed to multiple, so I always make about 100 of these. As for the internal packaging materials, I use a mixture of bubble wrap, which I'm getting rid of slowly as I want to move on to a paper-based material. And then alongside the bubble wrap I use this foam component, which I first started using when I was making pots in Japan and I had to ship them back to the UK. And it does a really wonderful job of protecting the sharp, delicate edges of my pots. So normally I start with a layer of the foam, which is folded around the pot in such a way that the most delicate part is protected the most, which in this instance is the pot's rim. I then add another layer of foam if I feel the pot needs it, and then I finish wrapping it with a layer of bubble wrap. I think ideally, the key here is that I don't want to be able to feel the pot underneath once fully wrapped. So if I were to press anywhere around this wrapped vessel, all I would feel is the protective padding, and not the pot itself. I then place a layer of biodegradable chips into the bottom of the box, slide in my business card, and then layer in more packaging chips over top, compressing them down until everything inside is really tight, and most importantly, so that the pot itself cannot rattle inside the box. And I can't reiterate that enough. Rattling when shipping pottery is the enemy. It's the one thing you really want to avoid, as soon as the pot can rattle inside, there's a good chance it'll break when in transit. Once everything's packed inside, I place a layer of tape all the way around the outside to pin down the tape that was used to close the top of the box. And in the past I have used some paper tape, but I've had some bad experience with labels not quite sticking to it properly and them falling off in transit. So if anyone does have some good suggestions for tape that works, I'd love to hear it. I then weigh the box and write down its weight and its measurements, and I write them down on the outside. I like to do all of my packaging first, and then once everything's packed away, I'll spend a day or two inputting all the details online and finally printing out the labels and sticking them on, together with all the other customs documents needed. Different shapes require different methods too. For instance, mugs or anything else with some kind of protrusion need to be packed in such a way that the handle needs to be really protected. So when it comes to my mugs, I usually wrap them in such a way that they get an extra layer of foam, making sure that it overlaps on the handle twice. And then as I proceed, I just make sure that the handle is the part of the vessel that always ends up being the most protected. That isn't to say that it's wrapped unevenly. Generally I want a nice even layer of wrapping the entire way around the vessel. But inevitably, as you're wrapping things, there's always going to be some areas that end up with more of the foam or less. So I just make sure that the areas with more are where the handles are. But there is another thing to consider, which is space efficiency. Ideally, we want to pack things in such a way that we don't end up wasting space when placed inside the box. So for these mugs, I place a layer of foam in between where the handles connect in the middle, and then I wrap them up together, as opposed to wrapping them up separately, which would mean then I'd probably have to pack them into a slightly larger box. is that at the end of the day, the smaller the box and the lighter it is, the cheaper it'll be to ship. But I don't think that's a reason to pack things with too little protection and to skimp with cheaper materials, as these are thin, handmade pots after all. They will break easily, and they need to be packed in such a way that they can be thrown at a wall and you won't have to worry about the item inside being damaged. Here's what I meant about not being able to feel the pot inside. Even when I press on the outside wrapping, I can't feel the clay underneath. Another thing I do in my studio is I try to recycle as much cardboard as I physically can. God knows we waste too much of it already, so I often line my boxes with extra bits of cardboard to reinforce them and to protect the corners, especially if they're going very long distances. When it comes to placing the wrapped pots inside, I position them in such a way that they're equidistant from all the edges. What I mean by that is they are exactly in the middle of the box. I don't want the edge of the wrapped pots to be right up close to the cardboard. I want it to be in the middle, away from the edges, with the biodegradable chips completely surrounding it, above, below, and all the way around. Again, I want the enclosed pots to not move whatsoever when fully taped up. It can't rattle or move, and this does often mean that the boxes are quite difficult to close. So if you can do this process with multiple people, it really does help tremendously, as while one person squeezes the box closed, the other can tape it up. And again, this might all sound obvious to you, but for those who haven't shipped pottery before, a video like this might come in really handy, as I've seen and received some really shocking parcels in my time, with either the contents smashed, or a pot somehow still intact, which is a miracle more than anything else. I then tape over any part of the box where the cardboard could spring open. I then use some fragile tape just to go over all those loose ends, which stops them potentially springing loose too, and the box losing tension. And when it loses tension, the packaging inside becomes loose. When it becomes loose, the item inside might rattle, and then again, that's when things might get damaged. It's also worth noting at this point that there are some instances where no matter what you do, the item will get broken, and that might not be any fault of your own. Inevitably, it just will happen. And it's for this reason that generally I always keep back quite a few spares, just in case something gets smashed along the way. This way I can send whoever purchased the item another one, which so far has only happened to me twice, but I'm sure in the future it's going to happen again and again, as I'm now shipping out much larger quantities than I have done in the past. This wrapping technique where you wrap from corner to corner, and therefore only have to use one piece of tape to close it up, is a method I never used until going to Japan. Then, during my apprenticeship with Ken Matsuzaki, wrapping it like this from corner to corner was the only way we were allowed to wrap pots, and it's actually a really wonderful technique for concentrating the wrapping material into the places you want, and if it means using less tape in the long run, then that's just a good thing. It's these packaging chips that I probably get through the most of. In a big shop update like this, I'll easily get through about 5 bags, which is almost 100 square foot of the stuff. I like it as it really lets me pack it into all the nooks and crannies inside the box, filling any possible void. And again, any parcels I receive in the studio, be it equipment, raw materials, clay, or anything like that, I'll always try and recycle the packaging materials those came in my own parcels. So while the boxes might not always be the most pretty things to receive, hopefully the pots inside will be really well protected. And after all, that's what needs to get you in one piece. I generally do all the packaging myself, which might be a bit crazy really. I think in the long term, and maybe quite soon, it'll be something that I hire some help for, as it's a lot of work, or at least it's very monotonous work. These 266 orders took me 5 days to get packed, and I'll spend a few days next week doing all the documentation for them. And my work days don't just end when I finish packing. Usually I head home, and then edit footage and photographs for my Instagram, where I've posted every single day without fault for more than 6 years now. Not to mention making these YouTube videos, which, as it turns out, is another huge time sink, albeit a very fun and rewarding one. Then there are the vessels like teapots, which require a lot more care and attention. I make sure that the lid, the handle, and the spout are really well protected, each part being covered by some additional layers of foam. If the item is particularly delicate, I'll also make sure that the box is really well enforced, and I might use one that's a little bit bigger too. That way I can squeeze inside more packing chips and more layers of protective cardboard, foam, bubble wrap, anything really that ensures that the teapot is really well protected. Once those individual areas have been protected, I'll encase the whole teapot with another layer of foam, and I try to make sure that these layers of protection are really put on quite firmly. They're tight around the shape. There's tension, which makes them springy, and I think therefore a little bit more protected. You'll see what I mean in a second here, when I really stretch this bubble wrap to fit on really tightly. I'm still getting through 2 giant rolls of bubble wrap I have. Thereafter, I want to try using some thick, recycled paper that will hopefully do more or less the same job. And here's an example of a really enforced box. There's also a piece on the base, and I'll put a piece on the top too, when it comes to closing the box. I'd be able to stand on it once fully closed up, and it would easily support my weight. Generally, if the original box I'm working with is only 1 wall thick, I'll always reinforce it. And then the further away it's being shipped, say if it's a parcel going to New Zealand or Japan or the US, I might reinforce it that bit more. In this instance, it took me about 5 days to pack everything. It's a slow process, and with every box I'm double checking that it contains the right things and that it's going to the right place. That being said, with 1,500 orders sent out, of course I've made errors along the way, be it forgetting to pack a certain pot into somebody's order, or even shipping it to the wrong address. I'm only human after all, but generally speaking it's always resolved. Bowls can be difficult objects to pack. They have a very fine, delicate rim, which is quite vulnerable, so I place a piece of foam underneath that's folded multiple times so it's really thick. I then place the bowl on another piece of foam and gradually fold that in towards the foot ring. This way the 2 most delicate parts are protected, the fine rim and the foot ring itself. I then cover the bowl again in another layer of bubble wrap. Again, what I'm aiming for is to not be able to feel the pot beneath the wrapping, and please excuse the plaster in many of these clips. I bought a shiny new tape gun for this round of packing, and it has particularly sharp teeth. And here, as I do the last fold, I make sure that the bubble wrap is taped together really tightly. I don't want the packaging around the form to be loose, I want it to be bouncy, like so. And as I'm packing, many of the parcels are different from one another. I have a huge stack of recycled cardboard and old corner protectors, which I'm slowly getting through. I think one of the most important things though, when it comes to packing pottery, is making sure that they're wrapped absolutely evenly. You want the foam or bubble wrap or cardboard or paper surrounding the pieces completely evenly, so there aren't any thin spots where the rim is exposed or other delicate parts of the pot. And again, just like anything, you get better with practice, although I can't say I enjoy packing all that much. For a week or so now I've barely been able to move around in my studio, because there are completed parcels and packing materials everywhere I go, and at the time of recording this audio, I've just come home after the final packages have been collected to be shipped off, and my studio feels so nice and empty now. I cannot wait to start making again next week. This is how I pack multiple bowls together. First, I start off with a thick layer, as always, underneath, and then I start placing layers of foam in between the bowls as I place them on top of one another. It's important to place enough packing material between them that when they're stacked like this, they still don't rattle. They want to be stacked very snugly on top of one another. I then gently push them all down, and then fold all the excess foam into the centre of the foot ring. I tend to limit these stacks to about 3 pieces. Anything more than that, and the wrapped up bundle of bowls begins to get way too large. And in this instance, as this one order contains 6 bowls, if one stack breaks, the other one will be okay, hopefully. I then take the wrapped up bowls like so, and place them rim to rim, before wrapping them up firmly, just to hold the 2 stacks together firmly. I then go and find a suitable box, fill it up with chips, and pack the bowls so they're central, and no part of the foot ring or the rims are close to the cardboard walls of the box. As always, there needs to be separation between the packaged object and the walls, and I fill that generally with these packaging chips. And I always spend a moment just stuffing them around the packed form, making sure they fill up all the nooks and crannies in the box. And then I often spend a few moments struggling to get them closed if they're really packed full. And this brings me to another point, which is that you really want your boxes to be really very full. If there are any cavities or voids inside, those are areas where the box can easily be crushed. So by packing your boxes really tightly and making sure they're incredibly full makes them so much stronger than a box that's only half filled up. This is perhaps a better view of folding corner to corner, like I mentioned previously. This way the folding culminates with only one edge that needs to be taped, as compared to having to use tape on 3 sides. So I place the object so it's facing the corner which I want to eventually end up on. I then fold in the sides and slowly roll it to that corner and tape it closed. And when filling in with chips, I make sure that there's just as many chips on the top portion here than there is underneath the pot on the base of the box. And truthfully, you could be doing this with anything. Any sort of packing material would work as long as you're packing the item so that it's central in the box and so that nothing inside rattles around. A good way of testing this is to shake it, and if you hear that the pot is bouncing around on the inside, then you know you haven't packed it well enough. The only thing I occasionally hear inside is my business card, rattling inside the pot it was placed in. Lidded forms can be tricky to pack, and my general rule is, if it's a small pot, I'll pack them with the lid in situ, like so, with a piece of foam squashed between the 2 clay components, and then, as I wrap, I make sure that the lid is held firmly against the body of the jar. If it's a much larger lidded vessel though, I'll pack the 2 components separately, and I like to fill up the void of the jar with packing materials. These little jars wrap up really nicely though. I guess fundamentally the shapes I make are all quite simple, so wrapping them is quite easy too. It's worth remembering though, that no matter how well you pack your pots, eventually something will break, and it usually won't be your fault. We've all seen the videos online of couriers chucking the boxes, throwing them as hard as they can, and well, if that's what they're going to do, you've got to make them strong enough to survive it. From some of the photos I've been shown of my boxes that have arrived with people, it's a miracle that the pots are still in one piece. Some have been completely crushed on one side, or the box has obviously got totally soaking wet and crumpled, which is why inevitably, even if you do package things up incredibly well, something along the way will break, and it's just part of it. It's breakage. These things happen, but I try my best to avoid it as much as I can. And really, I'm not worried about myself, but the fear of having someone unpack one of my boxes only to find a broken pot. That's what worries me. Their disappointment. It still amazes me really, that I'm even able to sell my pots online like I do. Had you asked me how I'd be conducting my business when I first started out, I'd never have dreamed of doing it like this. But I'm very lucky I can, and really that's down to all of you. My followers on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and everywhere else. The support over all these years, be it a purchase of a pot, or a like or a comment or a follow, it's all added up, and it's meant that I can do what I love for a living. Bigger pots are altogether more difficult to wrap, but really I'm just doing the same thing that I'd be doing to a smaller pot. I first put some extra padding that protects the delicate rim, and then I wrap the piece enough so that I can't feel any part of it if I were to press onto the wrapping. In the past, for shipping large pieces, I've used this recycled fabric, which comes in long rolls, and is wonderful for wrapping up bigger pieces like this. But when I don't have any on hand, I tend to just use whatever I've got. And that also applies to filling up the voids in the boxes too. If I've got spare polystyrene knocking around, I'll use that to reinforce the walls instead. Anyhow, I think it's about time we moved on to the next process. I weigh every single completed box, write the order number on it, the name, the destination, and the box's dimensions. I then spend probably a day or 2 entering all the information for the orders onto the courier's website, and recently I've been using DPD for UK orders and European orders and a few other places, and then I use UPS for the USA. I then print all the labels onto A4 stickers, and then I print all of my customs documentation, 2 to a page, so they'll fit nicely in an A5 jiffy on the side of the boxes. For the labels printed onto the sticky A4, I just use a guillotine to separate them all, then I attach each label onto its corresponding box. I should note that this video probably makes this end sequence all feel quite fast, when in reality it takes hours and hours, entering all the details, printing all of the paper, cutting it, applying it to the boxes. It really takes a long time, and I'm sure there are things I could do to speed up the process somewhere. This video isn't me saying how to do it the most efficient way or anything like that, it's just a look into how I choose to do it, and I'm still learning as I go. At the end of the day, I only do this much shipping probably about 3 times a year, and I think after this last batch, I think next time, I'm definitely going to hire some help, as even just having one other pair of hands would make this process twice as efficient, and ultimately that means I can spend more time actually making pots. Anyway, attaching these labels means I'm close to the end of the process finally. It's been a really busy few weeks, getting all these orders packed and shipped out, together with preparing work to be shipped down to Make, Hauser and Worth in Somerset, for an exhibition called The Impossibility of Repetition, which is now opened, and I'll include some more information about that in the description below. The orders I'm stacking up here are those going out to the UK, so they don't require any customs documentation. This makes these orders so much easier to process, so generally I can get those shipped out very quickly in comparison to those going elsewhere in the world. So here's a pile of the UK orders, and then to the left, all of those going to the US and Canada, who this time beat the Brits in terms of number of orders placed. The next step is to place all the customs documentation onto the orders shipping out internationally. Each box has to have the customs form put into one of these little pouches, which I then attach to each order. When I first started out, I would place these documents inside a little envelope, which I would then sellotape to the side of the box. And I can't tell you how much easier these pouches are to use. You simply insert the documents, peel off the sticky tape, and then carefully press it onto the area you want. One of the things that really helps to speed up doing these shop updates is to simply have all the materials at hand already. So these days I have a long list of materials that I need to process all the orders. So before each shop update, I'll go through them and double check that I have enough of each material. And finally the parcels can start to be collected. And one last tip I have is that I always give myself a day or two in between completing the transaction online and finishing packing the orders to when they're actually picked up. That way, if I or one of my customers notice an error in the shipping address, it can be easily fixed before the parcels are picked up, as correcting it once they're on their journey is almost impossible, unless you get very lucky. Here you can see quite clearly all the pockets that contain the customs documents for each parcel. And finally, at long last, every single one is finished, and all I have to do now is wait for the final pickup. And clean up too, of course, which always feels great after a week spent knee-deep in bubble wrap in boxes. Not only that, but many of the banks of shelves in my studio are also free, which finally means I can start to throw some new pots. It's funny, as the parcels leave, the studio suddenly feels so massive, but that won't last long. It'll quickly get back to its usual state of being filled up with handmade pots, in all manner of stages, be them bone dry, just thrown, glazed. I can't wait. That's all the boxes going to Europe and Canada collected. This last pile is all destined for the USA. Thankfully, each box is really light. After all, the majority of what I'm actually shipping is just packaging material itself. And that's it. They've all been shipped off. Thanks to everybody who purchased something in my last shop update, and to everyone who watches my videos too. You're the reason I can keep doing what I love. I'll see you next week.